Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Cal Rev's The Chest of the Best. The adventurer's best friend where you can get everything you want for just your top half off. And tonight, we are talking shop. Specifically, episode 10 of the Magnus Protocol. The last episode before they went on hiatus, and, well, the last episode before we're finally caught up, and this becomes more of a weekly occurrence rather than an all the time, every day kind of occurrence. But enough about that. Let's go ahead and just jump into the analysis of the episode. And I think I, along with many others, kind of sort of just lost our mind. This was the episode I think we were the most excited for, and how we got it very early on into the series. I feel like a lot of people, this is just speculation on my part. Personally, I was wondering when they were going to finally go to the Institute. After all, they brought it on very early on into the series, mentioning it within the first episode, if I recall correctly, and then immediately kind of sort of dropping it, letting it fester, maybe letting it, fester feels like the best way to describe it. Marinate, what's the word to describe wine, ferment as time goes on before eventually they would uncork that little bottle of horror and finally we'd go straight into it. But no, it's more of a drip feed, it seems, as over time the protocol has just sort of given us tidbits and little pieces hinting as to its existence and its work and how it operates in this universe, and now, at long last, we get to see what has become of the Institute proper. But we don't jump straight into it, unfortunately. But despite that, we do get to finally follow up on this on Nigel. Nigel Dickerson, which is, you may or may not recall from the last episode. Was it the last episode? Let me see. Last episode じゃないだろじゃないんです。Yes. Last episode brought us. Well, last episode introduced Nigel as a character in the sense that they are a previously big 90s TV celebrity, and this person, Nigel, is in fact who Lena assigns Gwen to visit, bringing him an envelope with a name and address inside, as well as telling her to note the reactions of Nigel Dickerson and any companions he may or may not have with him at that point in time. And then we find out why, specifically, Gwen is sent towards them. But prior to that, we are given the incident case itself. The incident is filed as case CAT 3RB 3354. Wait, no, that's incorrect. Whoops, sorry, wrong notes. Category 1RB-2275-0608 2021-0903-2024. Therefore, the case itself is noted as taking place in August 6th, 2021. That would put it 3 years prior to the date of March 9th, 2024. In this case, it is a mascot, specifically for kids, connected to a murder of sorts, and the medium in this case is a TV interview, therefore making it not dictated by any particular voice of Freddy, Chester, Norris, or Augustus. And it's noted for taking place one day after the events of the previous episode. It begins with the TV interview. We get a frankly horrific sound of very cheerful music as a TV host starts up with their interview with, wouldn't you know it, Nigel Dickerson himself regarding a one Mr. Bonzo, 90s mascot sensation. Nigel Dickerson being the creator of Mr. Bonzo and formerly a host of a show called Saturdays on 6, or SOS for short. Nigel's SOS. The setup was that Nigel was something of a prisoner in a comedy dungeon, and he'd been imprisoned and needed to put on a good show on behalf of Mr. Six. Mr. Six being a fake character, being the CEO of the channel network itself. One day, he conceived of he's not sure if he was the one who came up with it, but I guess the boardroom or creator room, writer room, came up with the idea of Mr. Bonzo, a joke character that was supposed to be a fake children's mascot. The idea was they'd bring someone serious, do a segment with Mr. Bonzo, selling him off as a fake popular children's entertainer, and see how long it would take before the serious person, the serious celebrity, would realize that it was all a joke. After, of course, Mr. Bonzo does outrageous things and just see how long it would take them before they realized, hang on, this character isn't popular with children. No, right? And it's described as an awful clown character, a big, bulbous, splotchy suit running around screaming his own name and generally being a nightmare. This is how he describes him, quote, word for word. At one point, they finally go through with this prank, and they invite a very surly guest to teach cooking, it seems, alongside Mr. Bonzo. But as soon as Mr. Bonzo makes their appearance, the celebrity guest goes completely pale and starts actually fighting back. This movement of the person in the suit freaks out even Nigel, although the prank apparently went off without a hitch. The guest, however, does attack Mr. Bonzo with a frying pan, breaking the arm of the person inside. After which, Mr. Bonzo apparently blows up in popularity. Children themselves, at least the ones that didn't wet themselves seeing him, liked him, eventually leading up to the release of a music single that topped the charts in the intervening years for about 5, 11, 12 weeks. I'm forgetting the number. Now, of course, the person in the suit changed many times over the years. It was apparently physically demanding, and there were many injuries that occurred, and it became something of a, quote, ritual that the newest member of the production crew would wear the suit until someone else joined. With the mascot, of course, going on to be a smashing hit. Eventually, it got to the point that everyone knew the prank, so they couldn't use Mr. Bonzo as a prank anymore. Instead, he became relegated to SOS Mascot, jokingly becoming one of the tormentors of the dungeon and replacing Mr. Six as the person in charge of Nigel's comedy dungeon. However, an incident flipped the public perspective of Mr. Bonzo, turning merchandise and guest show appearances and even the plans for an amusement park into scraps of a bygone dream. A one Terrence Menke, aka the Bonzo Butcher, who murdered 11 people but was caught while wearing a Mr. Bonzo costume. Apparently, there were plenty of other costumes in his wardrobe when the police finally managed to catch him. And the Mr. Bonzo costume that he wore was different in that the colors were wrong or perhaps the patterns were incorrect, but it didn't matter. Once Terrence Menke was caught, once the Bonzo Butcher was finally behind bars, and the details of his grisly murders, though they are undescribed in the TV interview that we are given in the incident, it didn't matter. It completely changed the script. Nigel himself would end up getting death threats despite having nothing to do with it. And Mr. Bonzo's whole merchandise empire completely crumbled, seemingly over the course of a single night. At this point, Mr. Bonzo is still only really popular on the, quote, edgier parts of the internet, as a meme, as it were. Nigel apparently still sells merchandise on his own website, never really paying much mind to who buys it, not that he can do anything about it, but the case of the matter is simple. People think of Nigel Dickerson, and Mr. Bonzo is never far behind, end quote. In a lot of ways, quote continues, he's more his prisoner now than he ever was on his own show. End quote. At which point, the interviewer brings up recent rumors in this age of 2021. Apparently, there have been witness statements from 3 murders over the last 5 years, claiming a person in a Mr. Bonzo costume was at the scene. At which point, Nigel gets very perturbed, very angry. Maybe not angry, but definitely cagey. Apparently, claiming that at that point, he says the interview is over. He says that they're not to contact, quote, us ever again, lamenting how Mr. Bonzo won't let him go. And then the incident ends. We cut back to the OIAR, and Colin has returned to the office that is seemingly devoid of people with the sole exception of Celia. Gwen is out on assignment, Alice and Sam are following up on a case, and Lena, it seems, is just holed up in her office doing who knows what. We never really get to know, now do we? Colin apparently wanted to ask Alice something, but unfortunately, due to the nature of what is going on at this point, there's nothing he can really be done. Colin, it seems, has been going to therapy, but ultimately decided that figuring out the system is more important and all he really needs. At which point he starts getting on the computers and starts doing his little bit of fiddling, telling Celia not to tell the others that he's been working on their terminals because they'll get the wrong idea, and also explicitly asking Celia to not tell Lena that he was there if she asks. And then it switches back on over to Sam and Alice at the Institute, who have busted into the area without too much trouble. It seems that they are digging through the ruins. At which point it is revealed to us that even going this far and coming to the coming to the Institute, and after having apparently some sort of epiphany or inspiration to trespass and come upon what can only be described as a waterlogged, destitute institute, Sam doesn't know what he's looking for. He just knows that he'll know it when he sees it, probably. They find, indeed, some kind of container, some kind of file cabinet, at which point he busts it open and finds mostly paper mulch. Nothing to really indicate some sort of anything valuable, except he does find a key. A very no indication of what it could be used for, but he thinks that it might just be the thing that he needs. Much to Alice's transgressions, Alice tries to talk him out of exploring more, but after finding the key, Sam is able to convince her to continue looking around for just a little bit more before the scene switches once again to the residence of Nigel Dickerson. From the way that it's presented, it seems to be coming from Nigel's phone. He comes down, right, to the door where Gwen is awaiting, arrives, and declares her intent, handing over the envelope. But Nigel, I suppose, tuts a little bit and clarifies that the message isn't for him. When Gwen isn't able to understand what he means by that, he tiredly invites Gwen inside and apologizes while turning on the music that played in the very beginning, which we learn is Mr. Bonzo's On His Way. He turns it up, and then we hear footsteps. Very booming, very, very just heavy, coming down, presumably stairs or down the hallway towards them, and Gwen is horrified. And you hear something saying, I think, Bonzo, Mr. Bonzo, the words Mr. Bonzo, in a very distorted audio, almost echoey too, as the footsteps get louder and louder, and Gwen is just shaking and horrified. Nigel calmly warns her against staring, and there's this deep grinding sound as Mr. Bonzo finally gets closer. Nigel talks to, or perhaps for, Mr. Bonzo, saying, quote, "Looks like they've got another one for you," and tells Gwen to give him the name and the address, the envelope. And Gwen just panics, asks who's inside the suit, still horrified, and this seems to annoy Mr. Bonzo until Gwen finally is convinced to give the envelope over. There's a snatching sound and a chewing sound before Nigel guides her out and tells her to tell her office, "You're welcome again," before telling her to get out of his, quote, his house. Not mine, his house. And Gwen, horribly shaken, obliges. Cut back to the Institute, and we get a little more insight onto the workings of our intrepid Sam and none too keen Alice, as the sound of a tape recorder being clicked on begins, rather than, the typical sound of a phone being logged into. It occurs inside a room, and we can hear the muffled sounds of Sam and Alice working on a door before eventually Sam actually busts his way in. They note that the wood indicates exactly the office itself. Apparently, all they can make out is the word Archie. They think maybe it might be a name, but they sort of play around with it, eventually landing on the possibility of archives or archivist. They find more mulchy books, and in the ground they note that there are worm track patterns on the ground, or possibly runes. While walking around, Sam falls through the floor, essentially. The wood gives way, and Sam almost falls into a gaping hole in the floor, dropping the key as he does. Alice manages to rescue him and pull him free, and angrily tells Sam that they didn't lose a clue, that they have no idea what they're doing here, and that there's nothing. That there's no closure to be had here, and Sam is chasing a ghost with no lead, no clues, and whatever it is he's hoping to find, it's not going to be there in the Institute. Of course, after her tirade, she apologizes to well, a broken Sam who realizes the grim reality of what is going on. Dude literally almost just fell through the floor in a ruins without any indication of what he's actually there for. He reveals that he has weird memories of being there, but no context. He wonders what was happening, why they chose who they chose, and why they didn't choose him. But he hears the reason in Alice's words and accepts that he needs to move on, that they should just leave, and without any further pomp and circumstance or any hemming and hawing, they leave. You can hear the rain falling around them, dripping into the ruins from somewhere above. And you can hear it plink plonking deep down into the hole where the wood gave way. But you can also hear the sound of something skittering around, something crawling along the floors. And then you can hear the sound of metal. Then you hear the sound of booming on wood, a knocking, if you will, if you prefer. And then you hear a clicking sound, and a creaking sound as wood comes under stress before creaky footsteps saunter up creaking staircases with heavy breathing and the faintest hint of chanting. And then the statement ends. Like I said, I don't know if it's like I said, but I lost my mind over this episode. Everyone, I think, lost their mind over this episode. And, oh, it cannot be, cannot describe just how phenomenal the voice work was in this, the soundscaping, the actors and actresses and their performances were absolutely phenomenal this episode. And it was so hard to finish this episode and find out that the series had gone on hiatus up until Thursday of last week. I mean, it was great for me because it gave me a chance to catch up on the series as a whole and figure out my analyses and put it to good use, but oh my god, what a show this episode put on. And what a cliffhanger it left us on for several weeks. I believe episode 10 aired, what was it? The 10th of March, I want to say, or maybe somewhere thereabouts, but it was rough. It was rough waiting for the next episode, but what a way to put us on pause. It left a lot to be analyzed, and we're gonna go ahead and just try to analyze it as best as we can here and now. First off, let's go ahead and look at the incident itself. Hello, why is it always clowns? It feels like it's always clowns with the Magnus Institute, where Magnus is concerned, whether it be archives or it be protocol. It seems that, it's hard to look at the world of Magnus as a whole and wonder how the stranger doesn't get as powerful as it does. The fear of the unknown, it feels so natural, right? It feels like it should naturally be the more powerful, more prominent entity, and maybe that is what the approach is when it comes to presentation. The fear of the unknown is always going to be the underlying factor in horror. It's what turns fear into horror, after all. That's how you turn any given tense moment in horror fiction into horror, when you prey on the unknown aspect of it. And this can apply to anything and everything. Wondering why, like, say, a cask of Amontillado, poor not Montresor, Fortunato simply just doesn't know why he is being walled in by Montresor, and that's what leads to his fear turning into proper horror. Because fear you can understand, fear you can run away from. Horror can follow you. And as seems to be the case with poor Nigel Dickerson, has he in this way become something of an avatar? I don't think so. He sounds like as much of a victim as our poor dice roller from last episode, as our violinist from episode 4 was it, taking notes. Once again, it seems less like we have victims and more like unwilling accomplices have appeared. It feels like we're looking at another unwilling accomplice in the form of Nigel Dickerson. He seems to have conceived of Mr. Bonzo, but it feels also more complicated than that. Perhaps in the conception of Mr. Bonzo and feeding into the fear of clowns, he has inextricably become connected. Although I do have to worry for Nigel, because there are aspects of his existence that could make things a little dangerous for him. See, one thing that I have to wonder is Mr. Bonzo actually older than his conception? Or, like, perhaps by simple use of the costume being used, has it become something more? Is it just older than that? Now, I have no real reason to really, explore that, but maybe the materials used to make Mr. Bonzo actually fed into its fear, the fear of the clowns, you know? It's in keeping with the stranger to feed off of that. Now, of course, at this point in time, utilizing the entities like this, when we know that they aren't so clear cut and split into the 14 that we know and fear, it's hard to look at this and not see only the stranger. Just with all the themes there, it feels less like there's anything being blurred and mixed here. For those who may or may not know, especially those who don't live in the UK, apparently it seems Mr. Bonzo takes inspiration from a similarly creepy and similarly unnerving mascot that blew up from prank to merchandise empire, a one Mr. Blobby. If Mr. Bonzo is in any way, shape, or form similar in appearance, that's fucking terrifying. First of all, Mr. Blobby takes the form of a gigantic purpley mass with spotted yellow polka dots, a similarly spotted bow tie around its face, a permanent grin, and bulbous green eyes. The uncanny valley being kind of sort of strong in this one. If you told me that this was just some sort of like random generator image, I would believe you. I don't know how else to describe it, but it's unnerving to say the least. And if that is Mr. Bonzo, then I can understand why suddenly that would inspire a fear of clowns in someone. But let's go ahead and look at Nigel Dickerson's association and relationship with Mr. Bonzo just a little more. I have to worry for Nigel, specifically as a creator for Mr. Bonzo. If we were to approach this whole situation as a presentation of the stranger, or at the very least, a fear of clowns and the unknown and mascot characters, then it calls to mind the stranger's presentation back in archives, specifically with regards to Gregor Orsanov and Nikolai Orsanov, made by and out of Grimaldi. Nikolai Orsanov was the dancer of the strain was the dancer essentially, which is to say they were the centerpiece of the stranger's machinations towards performing the unknowing and finally bring about the stranger into the material world. Gregor Orsanov was the maker of the inhuman puppet that was Nikolai Orsanov, who was made from the skin of another prominent avatar, possibly just a weirdo who fed into the fear of the unknown, the clown Grimaldi. This was noted as a fact from Magnus episode 97. We all ignore the pit in the post statement. Now, the thing is, Nikolai Orsanov would later go on to kill her creator, Gregor. I believe it was because she found him to be boring. Maybe it might have been a difference of opinion, or maybe Gregor just sort of realized that he was creating something of a monster. We never really get his opinion on the matter. But considering Gregor stuck around with the circus of the other, it's highly unlikely that he wanted out of it. I find it highly unlikely, at least, that he wanted out of it. Although there was one recorded incident of the organist leaving the circus, so who knows? Maybe he did realize that they had created something horrific and wanted out. Either way, what we have here is a demonstration of a creation killing its creator. And that's not the only incidence of that happening. This also occurred in Magnus Archives episode 116, The Show Must Go On, which was, I believe, a statement regarding, was it by Gertrude? I think it was by Gertrude, but it was a huge hint into how to disrupt the unknowing ritual, as it was a recording regarding not the first time, but the last incident that the stranger tried to pull off the unknowing, which was in the case of Wolfgang von Kempelen and his Mechanical Turk. Now, the Mechanical Turk historically was a automaton. Well, it was advertised as an automaton that was capable of playing chess with the greatest of the greats, essentially. It was advertised as being a robot, as being intelligent, although it was actually being piloted and operated by a puppeteer underneath the automaton itself, underneath the table. In this case, in the world of archives, however, the Mechanical Turk was obviously utilized differently, and its creator, Wolfgang von Kempelen, was noted for being a little weird, a little crazy, a little bizarre. And the Turk was utilized one last time. In the statement, it appears to utilize a sword, at which point it stabs into the table beneath it, killing whoever is supposed to be operating it before standing up on its own and dancing for the crowd, ultimately culminating in the unknowing becoming reality, and reality becoming undone, before eventually an avatar of the slaughter shows up, destroys the Turk, and prevents the stranger from emerging completely. Now, it's never fully clarified whether or not Kempelen was the one that was killed underneath the Mechanical Turk, but, he never really found someone to pilot the Turk after its initial pilot, I guess, realized that it was really uncomfortable being involved with this performance, as well as honoring prior engagements. But considering the fact that Kempelen never shows up ever again, I would hazard a presumption, or assumption, if you will, that Kempelen died at the hands of his creation in the name of the noble cause of bringing about the apocalypse. In any case, that's two creators of two separate dancers killed in either in connection to their creations or by the creations themselves. Nigel, I'm not liking your odds. I'm really, really not liking your odds when it comes to Mr. Bonzo here. And why don't we go ahead and look at Mr. Bonzo himself? What the actual heck are we dealing with when we look at Mr. Bonzo? Fear of clowns, fairly easy. The uncanny, the strange. Wow. Just wow. You know what? We'll come back to Mr. Bonzo because we're looking at this from an incident perspective. And we've been jumping back and forth between Nigel of then and Nigel of now. We'll come back to it. Colin's back in the office. Apparently, the therapy sessions aren't doing him any favors, apparently. Freddy, it seems that during this entire time, hasn't listened in on his therapy sessions or his home life. Obviously, the home life is probably obvious in the sense that he probably is incredibly, paranoid still. Probably has disconnected and is living off the grid, meaning Freddy has no means of listening in on him, no matter how hard he tries. Although, at the same time, it should be noted that Freddy has also not listened in on any kind of, correspondence at any point in time. It hasn't listened in. If Colin has explicitly asked his therapist to not have external devices on during their therapy sessions, it's rather interesting that Freddy has not locked in on any emails, any voice calls, telling with Colin, because it's 2024. These therapists probably aren't going to do that right off the back unless they are explicitly told Because Colin probably would have asked them not to. Knowing what he knows about the office, he probably would have asked them not to, but there's still nothing to demonstrate. I mean, he couldn't stop Sam. He couldn't stop Sam. Sam straight up came up to his office with a phone, and the phone is how we were able to listen in on the conversation in the first place. But he's not trying when it got. But Freddy wasn't able to catch that. Maybe that's an indication that Freddy isn't omniscient, which is good. Whoever is operating Freddy or operating whatever it is to listen in on the OAR isn't able to just immediately go back and forth, quite similar to perhaps how Elias wasn't able to focus his mind and read the minds of others unless he was explicitly focusing in on them, which is good, I guess, for our intrepid heroes, but it might also imply that maybe it's not the OIAR and its upper management who would reasonably want to listen in on what could possibly be a leak. Who's to say? But Colin, I think Colin's presence in the story is I think we're approaching the end of it. Possibly at the hands of, implicitly, Gwen. As we learn here in the next scene, Gwen isn't killing Nigel, which I don't know if that's good or bad. Maybe not so good for Nigel. This is apparently, however, a learning experience for Gwen, as she gets to get in touch with, I guess, one of their external contractors, Mr. Bonzo. When the envelope was handed on over, Nigel notes to Mr. Bonzo that it seems that the OIAR has, quote, another one for him. In other words, Mr. Bonzo is a contracted killer for hire by the OIAR. I don't know what they pay him. Odds are maybe it's the thrill of the hunt that seems to feed Mr. Bonzo the fear of the unknown or the fear of the grotesque. You know what? Maybe there is an aspect of other entities to be had here that makes this more of a blended avatar of fear rather than an explicit fear of the unknown. Because we never really see or hear what Mr. Bonzo is made of. But, if the stranger is present, then I think you can make an argument for the flesh. And if he is a contracted killer, then I think you can make an argument for the case of the hunt as well, which is not too good for whoever it is on that envelope and where their home is. Who no. Which brings me to try and analyze a little more about this situation, right? Now, the TV interview, as it occurs in the incident, takes place in 2021. The interviewer says at the end, when they bring up the rumors of a possible copycat killer on the loose parading as Mr. Bonzo, first of all, if indeed Mr. Bonzo is their contracted killer, then that means that he has been under the OIAR's employ for at least, 2021, 3 years, 8. Mr. Bonzo has been under employ of the OIAR for around 8 years because the interviewer says that apparently over the past 5 years there have been 3 murders with witness reports stating that someone wearing a Mr. Bonzo costume was in the area. 8 years of working under the OIAR with 3 murders, possibly more. There's a lot. There's not a lot there to unpack. We know, at the very least, from the statements of this interview, that For whatever reason, the OIAR has contracted Mr. Bonzo to eliminate individuals for the past 8 years. And it seems that they have contracted one this year, 2024. Who could they possibly have contracted Mr. Bonzo to eliminate? We don't know, but we can certainly hazard a guess. And again, I get the sinking suspicion that it is in fact Colin, the one that is poking his nose in everything and trying to understand far too much than is healthy for him, to the point of causing disturbances in the workplace. Certainly something that someone as dedicated to a functioning workplace as Lena would absolutely want to have done, I guess, and maybe even her superiors. But then the question is, who else has the OIAR had Mr. Bonzo eliminate? 3 murders over 5 years from 2021 and beforehand. 5 years. We don't really have a timetable or timeline for when certain figures left or joined the OAR. Alice notes that Klaus was before her time. There's no mention of Amelia, and it doesn't seem that anyone has brought up Amelia since then. Klaus obviously survived his attempted murder by Lena, but there's no guarantee that Mr. Bonzo didn't get him. Until we find a body, there's no proof. Odds are maybe Mr. Bonzo has been on the hunt for him but has not had any luck. I just think that we're going to see Klaus again. It feels like he'll be our Jurgen. He'll be our person under the tunnels. Whether he'll live longer is besides the point, but I think he's going to be our person under the tunnels in this situation, in this continuity. So I expect to see him again, but is Amelia dead? Did Mr. Bonzo get to Amelia? It seems odd to bring her up when she could or could not be dead at this point. Maybe she's still alive. Is Mr. Bonzo gonna go after Teddy, a former employee? Is this just one of those things where it's blood in, blood out? Lena, I don't know. But 3 murders, 3 people that we couldn't possibly even guess the identities of at this point because there's nothing to go off of. We can wonder if there is any real connection to other incidents that happen. For example, if Mr. Bonzo's activities, this is a big if Mr. Bonzo's activities start 5 years prior to the interview, that would put it at 2016. And the only thing that really notably happens in 2016 is the fire at Hilltop. There's no real indication of that being important or if there's any connection to it, but we do have that private military contractor, possibly that security firm. Excuse me, we don't know if it's a military contractor, but we know the security firm did wipe out all those present at the Hilltop Center. We don't know who they're connected to, but we could maybe hazard a guess and say that maybe they're connected to the OIAR. Is this just another... Does the OIAR contract this security firm, aka possibly Starkwell, and also contract Mr. Bonzo? Like, is this one of those things where Mr. Bonzo is the tactical sniper, whereas Starkwell or the security firm is their Godzilla threshold, per se, where one thing requires subtlety and another may require a more heavy-handed approach, such as potential ritual nonsense at Hilltop Road? Or was that a machination, another sort of like weaving of the web at hand and pulling of the threads and puppeteering things in the background? Like, what are they trying to protect, right? For what reason are they trying to ensure that someone doesn't get too much information? What is considered too much information in this instance? What is considered too much too much information, and at what point does someone get bonzoed at this stage? You know, what's the difference between sicking Mr. Bonzo on someone and then having Lena do it? When was Lena sent out to deal with Klaus? And is her fuck up actually just an instance, just a red herring, and Klaus actually isn't around? Maybe Gwen's little blackmail doesn't really work here because maybe upper management already knows, and they realized, hey, instead of having us normal humans, possibly normal Lena humans doing it, maybe they should just have the professionals take care of it in the hands of a security firm such as Starkwell, which for all we know might actually be a organization of the hunt. Or if I were to narrow it down to a specific fear, although they seem a little too professional, maybe they might be the slaughter. That would also make sense, but again, nothing to indicate that much. There's also, and they left it in the hands of a killer clown. Why? Why? And it's just fascinating. Maybe all the fears are just working together at this point in time. Maybe the entity is fully, like, all of its avatars and all of its little, maybe all of its avatars are working together appropriately, because in this instance we see what could possibly be the stranger working with possibly a stronghold of the eye, maybe a stronghold of the eye. Again, that kind of goes counter with my idea that maybe the OIAR is unconnected to any of the entities proper and is merely trying to take preventative measures. But then the thing about that is it kind of falls apart considering the fact that Lena is contracting avatars of the entities. At the very least, that is just straight up confirmed with Mr. Bonzo. You can maybe look at the Starkwell and security firm as being just disconnected, cold-blooded professionals without any real eldritch connection to the fears in any way, shape, or form. Maybe they just know that what they're dealing with, but maybe they're not the hunt. Maybe they're not the slaughter. So it's easier to just sort of like hand wave or lampshade or just paint the OAR as being a government branch, maybe underfunded, maybe secretly supported by the upper echelons of the government to deal with the entities and their machinations as best as possible, with the incident assessment coming in quietly and then just haphazardly being shuffled off over to some mysterious response department that the average OIAR office worker wouldn't actually know about. Maybe, right? And maybe the Eye was explicitly targeting the OIAR by spying on them, and this is just, they are just normals fighting a war without knowing it. But it all kind of sort of goes out the window when we see Lena explicitly going to something that is unquestionably an eldritch horror, that behaves mysteriously, that operates less in the gray and just more in the black. It's it's just an odd behavior as well for the strangers as well, for any aspect of the stranger to take on a contract, to be a contract killer. I mean, yeah, we kind of sort of get that with Breakin and Hope, but those guys were just sort of like, they enjoyed spreading the fear for everyone else because they kind of sort of like got what they wanted as avatars of the unknown in the sense that they were delivering cursed objects to different people. The fear of the unknown is, like I said, always sort of leaks into every statement because the unknown is what makes horror horror. But that's they never really did that on behalf of the Eye, I don't recall. And they all even Breakin and Hope kind of sort of looked at the Eye as being sort of counter to the Stranger, because in that world, all of them kind of sort of looked at their opposites and looked at all the others around them and just sort of thought, hey, that is an enemy of sorts. The Vast looked at the Buried, although there was no real organized effort by the Buried. The Vast kind of sort of looked at each other as diametric opposites. The Dark and the Stranger both looked at the Eye as their polar opposites, because to know what's in the dark is to not fear it. To know what's unknown is to not fear it. So the unknown, the Strangers, would not work with the with the Institute. Yet here we see the diametrically opposed working together. Now, again, we still don't know if the OIAR is a stronghold of the Eye, but it's bizarre. For them, it's new, it's different, and it's them working together for some unknown reason. And the only instance that we have of avatars coming to conflict with each other is the incident at the Hilltop Center, with potentially the web coming under direct fire with the hunt, the slaughter, possibly the desolation. There's also the possibility that it's not the web. It could be the Stranger, considering how bizarrely they behaved. But the organized effort leads me to wonder elsewise, and the way that they talk about Hilltop, how they know it better than anyone, supposedly, and the machinations of the web in generally lead to them wanting to do something with Hilltop, which is usually, I say usually, but on brand and in character, would be to crack open the crack into a proper gap in reality. And, my theory is that they're trying to someone or something is trying to speed run the apocalypse. And maybe that is kind of sort of what is happening here. All the fears understand maybe what they are meant to do and what they are trying to do, which is to break into reality and then escape it. Or who knows? Maybe they still hunger for fear, but they know better than to break into reality and do it all over again. But, the end craves that end, right? And they all got greedy enough to not think about the future. Why would they start thinking about the future now, when there's only two that can really do it? Or who knows, maybe it's split up into multiple aspects to finally conceive of a actual plan rather than intent and instinctual desire. I don't know. We don't know. It's a lot, to say the least. But regardless of what the fears and the entities are working towards now, there is some ideas that maybe the OIAR is trying to is a means of weakening the entities by fracturing the fears in as many individual and interpretable categories as possible, and therefore make it impossible for them to come into reality. But then again, if they're trying to make that happen, then why contract an avatar to eliminate someone trying to understand the system? Does understanding somehow work counter to what they're trying to do? Like, what is the purpose of hiding a secret in this world? What does the secret serve, and for what purpose? What would be the danger if the secret were to get out? Because in the case of archives, if the whole workings of a certain specific plan were to be revealed, then that would mean the entities not coming into reality. So is the goal to get the entities into reality again? Or is it to stop them? No idea. For now, perhaps in the interest of safeguarding humanity, we can just try to break down whatever the individual avatar is doing. And in this case, all we can really try to analyze properly in terms of behavior is Mr. Bonzo. What we know is Mr. Bonzo is some sort of serial killer. Inhuman in some way, both in appearance and behavior, and probably more that we aren't getting just through an audio medium. Only what others react to. And one of the things that it reacts to, interestingly enough, and quite on brand and in character for the strangers, is the music. We know that it reacts to music because, for some reason, Nigel turns up the music, and that leads Mr. Bonzo to come down the stairs. It's quite similar to Magnus Archives episode 24, Strange Music, wherein a presumably clown monster closes in on the well, I guess no, not clown monster, the stranger as a whole seems to close in on the calliope whenever it's being played. In this case, Mr. Bonzo seems to react to the music and follows along towards it. Now, this could end up being a warning sign for us whenever Mr. Bonzo appears. So, I guess we'll just have to wait and see before we finally get a view of his handiwork proper. Whatever happens, well, we know for a fact that Freddy is capable of catching incidents as early as 3 days before they're filed by the team. So, well, I expect either we're going to get a coroner's report or a emergency services call. Or maybe even a phone call. And when that happens, well, we'll just have to see how whoever's listening to it reacts. And that brings us to Alice and Sam, who are exploring the Magnus Institute properly. Now, apparently, Sam's search for the truth. Questions abound, obviously, for the Institute. He says he remembers weird circumstances from his time at the Institute, and he wants to know why they chose who they chose and why they ultimately didn't choose him. Which means, what exactly? What does the Institute want? We know that they're doing something just ever so slightly different from what they were doing in Archives. In Protocol, it seems that they are focused mostly on collecting artifacts. Now, collecting artifacts, as I mentioned in the last episode, was something that would occur. It fed into their research. They were an academic institute dedicated towards studying the supernatural, so it makes sense that they would have them, and they would try to collect them in conjunction with getting statements. Now, of course, the statements served a grander purpose, both in the regards to the machinations of the one really pulling the strings and the machinations of the one who was working at the Institute. There was a practical reason for collecting statements. Here, however, it seems that they had less vague designs. In this instance, it seems that they are collecting artifacts as demonstrated from the previous episode. It seems that whoever gave the dice over to them, they noted that the Institute is explicitly looking to collect artifacts, and we know that they evaluate artifacts in different... Well, we don't know if they evaluated them like this in archives, but in protocol, it seems they check to see if artifacts are capable of being an agent, which we don't know what for, a subject, which we don't know what for, and a catalyst, which, again, we don't know what for. As a catalyst, I consider the possibility that maybe they are collecting artifacts as a substitute for the potential of creating a ritual and bringing about the entities into reality. It would seem like a possibility based off of the occurrences at Hilltop. But the reasons for using the artifacts there, maybe it was to speedrun the apocalypse and bust open the crack in reality yet again. Who's to say? Again, not enough evidence to support this theory yet. But then again, we don't know what subject and agent could mean in this situation. All we know is that the dice in the previous episode, despite having a very powerful inclination towards bringing about someone good luck or misfortune in the form of pain and actual injuries, linking them potentially to either the end or desolation or the slaughter. Although more likely desolation and death, but who knows, there could be another aspect of it. Misfortune, fear of misfortune seems to be a pretty good evaluation, but despite that, it wasn't evaluated as having any viability as a subject, whatever that means. It seems to have a low viability as an agent, whatever that means, and we know that the Institute marked it for potentially being enriched. With what? We don't know. But in conjunction with collecting artifacts, they were collecting people, it seems. Like, of course, sure, in a given world, an academic institute may, go on to try to, get gifted children and sponsor them and get them scholarships and the potential that they may go on to do amazing things in the name of STEM, science, art, what have you. As the world exists, there are as many ways to get a scholarship, and I guess the institute wanted to have its own Magnus scholarship. Except clearly not. They wanted something else. What if the Institute wanted another John? What if the Institute wanted another John, except this time they knew to be on the lookout for someone that could be a John for them? 'Cause with everything that is happening, with the way everything is occurring in this universe that is Protocol, it really does just seem like Protocol does occur. I mean, I feel like for no one in particular, I don't think that anyone doubted that this was more a sequel rather than a parallel occurrence or prequel, especially with the presence of John and Martin being there in the form of Chester and Norris. It leads me to wonder, because John explicitly says that the eye can't see its origins, that it can't know how it came to existence. However, that at the same time seems to be countered in episode 200, the final episode of Archives, wherein the statement seems to come from the thing that was fear. And the thing that was fear, as told from the eyes of John as he narrates his last statement, it suggests that the eye can see its origin, when at least the entity itself is made whole, I guess, in the form of a singular person, which in this case was John. So, if the entities were dragged into this new universe, then this would suggest, and based on the activities of the Institute itself, if they were indeed looking for another John, then that means they do that means that the entities, or at the very least the eye, does recall what happened last time and does recall what the needed ingredient is for either bringing about the change or just or ejecting itself from the change itself. I'm going to go ahead and call it and say that the Eye and the Institute was trying to find another John in order to bring about the change and speedrun it as quickly as possible. Now, if the OIAR is a stronghold of the Eye, then all of a sudden, maybe this starts to make more sense again. Maybe the entities are still sort of fighting each other despite the blending of the fears and all that. Well, I mean, the entities are never fighting each other, it's their avatars, but maybe perhaps the blending of all the fears is there. And maybe the Eye actually is trying to prevent them from being split up too much to prevent it. And maybe they're also trying to prevent the web from trying. You know what? This feels like a theory that I think I'm coming up with this on the spot because this isn't in my notes, and maybe I'm just sort of like exploring a little too much. I need to organize this one. This one doesn't make too much sense yet. I need to go over my spreadsheets to ensure that it vibes well with what the next couple of episodes. But at the very least, I think I can look at this and at least hazard a reasonable guess, which is that the Institute was trying to create or find another John, another person that they could reasonably believe would speedrun to the change. The question is, were they successful? Ultimately, they didn't choose Sam. But that means they had to have chosen someone. Have we met that someone? Is my question. And while we're at it, does Gigi know? Does Gigi know what was going on in the Institute? I think our answers to everything involving the Institute are ultimately going to come from either Lena, who seems to know everything at this point, maybe not everything. She still doesn't know who Gwen's source was, and for all we know, that source may be someone we can trust, or it might not be someone we can trust. We'll just have to wait and see. Or Gigi, aka Gertrude, and her wonderful grandson, Jerry. Or who knows, maybe Mary is also active and we can get some answers out of her. Who's to say? Maybe Klaus has some answers. But my money is on either Gertrude or Lena, knowing the full extent of whatever it is the Institute is up to. Of course, there's also whatever the protocol is, and why on earth is it named the same thing as the Institute, but we'll just have to wait and find out. Now, regarding the artifacts, I think it's the same principle of trying to speed run to the change, with them possibly wondering and exploring the possibility of artifacts serving the same purpose as as a person, seeing if it could be a worthy substitute. I mean, many times in different rituals, certain fears have utilized specific artifacts as a means of solidifying or manifesting the fear. For the stranger, they utilized skin, they utilized music. For the spiral, they utilized a gigantic sculpture. The dark, the lightless church. No, that's not it. The People's Church of the Divine Host. That's right. They use the light. They use the dark star. The artifacts of some sort have been utilized after all, but Whether that remains as a viable option for them is hard to say. I sincerely believe that the web managed to snag those artifacts among many others around the world and brought them to Hilltop in the end and tried to utilize them for their cracking of the reality. But again, that's just a theory. Instead, we should probably set that aside, put a pin in it, go ahead and put that on the conspiracy wall and have a couple of loose red threads there and wait and see which way they end up going and connecting to what specific details. In any case, it would be best to set it aside and focus instead on whatever the heck is occurring in the Institute. First of all, can we assume that Freddy or the OIAR or whoever it is listening in has access to something completely disconnected to the internet as, I don't know, a magnetic tape recorder? Why is that just there? Why is that just there First of all, it's in the archives. There's no doubt about it. They end up in the archives and they're exploring it there. But then the tape recorder is just turned on. I feel like there are a number of people that didn't quite catch on to the fact that it was a tape recorder, or maybe they're so used to hearing the tape recorder click sound at the start of every statement in archives, but here we are, it's playing on its own. It doesn't feel like something that Freddy or the OIR can just have access to in any way, shape, or form. Yeah, it's connected to, I guess, the intercom system in the OIR. It's connected to the landlines. It's connected to the internet, government, court-ordered therapy sessions, evidence, databases, the Magnus Institute's own digital database. Obviously it has access to all these things, and you could hand wave it as it being this eldritch creature. But it's connecting to, or is it, right? Is it connecting to a tape recorder inside the archives that is just magically intact despite the fire and the waterlogging from years of rain? Because again, the Institute burned down in 2016. There's just a perfectly functional tape recorder there. It leads me to wonder, is it possible that maybe, just maybe, it's not through Freddy that we're listening in on it? What if there are now 2 groups that are eavesdropping on our intrepid adventurers' mishaps and misadventures? What if we're listening in through the lens, or rather the tape or the ears, of a different entity or group or faction altogether? We'll come back to that. For now, let's look at the archives. From the looks of it, it sounds like the archives has kind of sort of been through a lot of the old things, and it kind of, now that I'm looking at it, it kind of throws a wrench into my assumption earlier that the entities aren't warring with each other, because there are worm tracks in the archives. Again, it seems that the corruption has once again tried to attack the Institute, although who knows, maybe they were successful in this instance, and maybe the fire was actually in response to the corruption attack. Or perhaps it's unrelated and no one ever got around to fixing the worm tracks in the ground. I mean, no one ever mentioned them after Prentice's elimination in archives. No one seems to mention that there are any worm tracks in the floor, or at least from what I can recall. Who knows? Maybe there were, and the corruption failed in its attack on the archives yet again. Who's to say? But at the very least, we know that the entities and their avatars apparently don't get along as much as we thought they did. Although, what if this was another instance of an attempted a ritual wherein the burning could be the desolation, the corruption could be with its worm tracks, and the Institute, of course, being a stronghold of the eye. Maybe they did try to do their thing all over again here. Oh, wait, no, the Institute burned down in 2000. My bad, I mixed it up. Maybe this was. Maybe they were working together and trying to do a similar thing prior, but it didn't fall apart. But I think it's probably safer to assume that the worms are, in fact, attacking the Institute yet again. So, I guess my little theory earlier that maybe they're working together a little more comfortably working together is incorrect. And who can really say? It's not like all the avatars in archives that work together were friendly with each other. After all, Peter was, despite being friendly with Elias, still worked against him, and vice versa. The Lucases as well, they kind of sort of like just maintained cordiality with others. And of course, whoever it was that burned John's hand from the Desolation, it's not like the Desolation liked working with the Eye, and they disliked the fact that they had to cooperate on certain aspects. There was a lot of tension, so I think I spoke a bit recklessly when I said that maybe they're all working together to bring about the change. But who knows? Maybe if I organize my notes a little better, I could make a stronger case for it. But it's definitely not happening tonight. Next, we have the hole that opens up while Sam is walking around. It sounds to me like the Institute was built on some extensive ruins again. Whether or not this has to deal with, what was it, Pembroke Prison? I think that was the name of it. Maybe it's built over a prison again. Maybe there's some more panopticon madness going down on deep down. Maybe the architecture is maneuverable, much like it was in the previous series. No real indications go with, but at the very least, we can probably assume that maybe, just maybe, Red Canary is down there. Somewhere, or was down there. They had to have gotten down there somewhere, but that feels like there's probably a small hole in that theory. Either way, Red Canary has to be somewhere down in those tunnels. Maybe we'll finally get to see them. Maybe we'll get to see whatever it was that got to Red Canary in the first place and undid them. Or maybe Red Canary is distant from this space and the pictures that were taken of them were in the end somewhere else and in the comfort of their own apartment. Although we never exactly got a police report about their body being found, so no way to know for sure, but something, obviously, should be at this institute, and it didn't close in on our intrepid Sam and Alice, but then again, Red Canary wasn't exactly taken out immediately. There was a bit of marinating of their fear, as it were, as time went on. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Anyways, it's a shame that they would lose the key, of course. Perhaps it would have been a very. Perhaps it was the thing that Sam needed that would lead Sam to the truth, the closure that he could have gotten, right? Except I don't think we need to worry about that key because there was a fair bit of skittering now, wasn't there? There was a fair bit of skittering that was heard in conjunction with the plink plonking of water into the deep dark hole. And, well, I can't help but wonder, maybe it was worms? Could it be the worms? Could they have survived their little incident at the Institute? Maybe they got done in by the CO2 system. Although, if the CO2 system wasn't there, then, how did the whole thing go up in flames in the first place? So, perhaps it was worms. right? Perhaps it was worms because they didn't utilize CO2 fire extinguishers to deal with them like they did in the archives. Who can say? I mean, the fact that the Institute itself burned down could be a very strong indication that the CO2 system wasn't implemented. Or who knows, maybe they didn't refill all the CO2 before the whole place went up in flames. Or maybe they just did it the old-fashioned way with good old-fashioned... I don't know. I don't know. It could be worms. But my inclination is that it would be spiders. Mostly because of the presence of the tape recorder. And I feel like it would be totally on brand and in character to utilize the unforeseen consequence of Sam losing the key to take that opportunity to take said key, crawl out of the hole with it, because we know it can be noted that the tape recorder most certainly did not fall down the hole with the key itself. And then we hear skittering, we hear a booming on a door, possibly one of those heavy hidden doors that lead into the tunnels properly. And then the door opens. Now, the only thing we really know about this thing that comes crawling out, breathing like an asthmatic in the middle of a smoking zone, is that it's called Error. It's simply called Error. Maybe this is related to how in private screening the episode involving the movie the movie Voyeur, maybe it's related to that, where certain aspects, certain parts of it are quote unintelligible, but that's just, who knows. It's kind of bizarre that Chester literally just says unintelligible, but it could mean nothing. But other than that, that's all we really know. The incident, this episode ends without much else of anything. All we can really garner is that they were locked underneath the Institute for who knows why or what possible reason. And now they're free. To do what? We don't know. Maybe they're the lucky winner of that gifted children's program. Or maybe they're just completely unrelated and they're just their own separate entity. I kind of played around with the possibility, the idea that maybe, just maybe, they could be an archivist of sorts, an older archivist. It wouldn't be the first time. This occurred way back in Archives episode 53, Crusader, where one Sergeant Walter Heller discovers the Serapeum of Alexandria and encounters an old, wizened archivist still doing his life's work underneath the earth. Although I do believe that place got bombed too, by Gertrude, naturally, but still. Whatever it is, I shudder to imagine what purpose it is meant to serve. And, a part of me wonders if maybe they're something of a good guy. Not a good guy, but like an ally of sorts. If only because my suspicions are that the web has had a hand in ensuring that that old key in a busted up filing cabinet would make its way over to that specific door and open that specific way out. I feel certain saying that the web is pulling the strings yet again, although one has to wonder why the spider itself couldn't just go into that filing cabinet and bring that key out. But, I mean, hey, there's limits to what you can do. We'll just have to keep an eye out for any mysterious figures that incite a feeling of being watched, I guess, from here on out. And I imagine that we're going to get that from either Sam and Alice, Because after all, the last person that we know of to come to the Institute ended up feeling a profound sense of paranoia and being watched ever since they left, until eventually they were presumably turned inside out at the end of it. So yeah, that's something to look forward to, something to be on the lookout for, and something to be worried about. And I gotta say, Alice, it was wonderful. Your tirade, your monologue to Sam and telling him about how closure is for movies, it was beautiful. It was well delivered. I think the actress did a phenomenal job of delivering it. But hey, this is episode 10. The series is going to have 3 seasons, each about like 20 minutes long and about 20 episodes long each, I think was the direction that it's supposed to be going. So for as beautiful as your speech was, I'm sure if it were any other genre, that would be the end of it. We'd all go home, and the protagonist would learn sometimes that it's best not to chase ghosts, and they would find closure in the love and cherishment of their present day and the future. But this is the Magnus protocol. This is horror. We're not done yet. And whatever is coming up next, it's definitely not going to be a pretty sequence of events. But that's all we get from episode 10. And with that, you're basically caught up. Thankfully, the hiatus already ended. And as I mentioned earlier, it ended on Thursday of last week. Episode 11 is already out for both non-patrons and for free. It's on their YouTube. You can listen to it for free. I've already listened to it. I'm organizing my notes as we speak. I'm organizing my analyses. Obviously, it's a very rough sort of thing, but I'm going to try to take the time this time to connect it to as much of my previous hypotheses and theories and events that have occurred in the past, and just try to sort of organize my spreadsheets as best as possible. That way, when if you've noticed the schedule, have I put out the schedule? I have put out the schedule. So we're going to be doing Talking Shop this Thursday yet again. It'll be, as I mentioned before, now that we're all caught up, it'll be a weekly occurrence, so be on the lookout for that. For those of you who are watching the VODs or listening in, feel free to post your theories, your hypotheses, your corrections, if you would like, in the comments. Leave a like, subscribe, follow, and I hope to catch you guys when I catch you. But with that being said, guys, we're going to leave it off there. Thank you so much for popping in, hanging out, being your beautiful selves. I deeply appreciate it. With that being said, shop's closed. Get out. Bye-bye, guys.